Hey everyone, it's Denise Brown from the Caregiving Years Training Academy. Thanks so much for being here today. This is the second of our two-part Big Ideas series for 2024. We have two presenters. They're each going to take 10 minutes to share a big idea. At the end of those 20 minutes, we're going to engage in a conversation with those who have joined us live. If you are here live and you hear something that you'd like to know more of, feel free to post a question or an insight in the chat room during that presentation, and we'll make sure to get back to that during our facilitated conversation. Okay, Amy is ready. So Amy, kick us off with your big idea to improve the caregiving experience.
Okay, thank you, Denise. Thank you, everybody, for attending our presentations. I'm going to be talking about From Tranquil to Turbulent, why customized emergency plans are crucial for rural family caregivers and their older carees. My name is Amy, and I have been a rural family caregiver for more than 15 years. And that's exactly why I am a planner. I truly believe that being prepared allows family caregivers to be calm and confident caregivers. And considering the back-to-back hurricanes that recently slammed into Florida, I think emergency planning is a particularly timely topic. One would think natural disasters hit everyone equally, whether you're rich or poor, live in the city or the country, if you're young or old, but that's simply not the case. Older adults are hit a lot harder during natural disasters, and emergencies quickly become life-threatening for them for many different reasons. They could be chronic health conditions, mobility issues, cognitive decline, or loss of consistent medical care or treatments. But we look at some past storms. Hurricane Katrina in 2005, about 1,400 people were killed. 71% of those were 60 years old or older. The Chicago heat wave of 1995, 739 people were killed. 63% of those fatalities were 65 years old or older. Winter Storm Uri in 2021. In Texas alone, there were 246 fatalities. 60% of those were 60 years old or older. So if older adults are more susceptible to disasters, what can we do as family caregivers to mitigate some of the risks? We can prepare. 76% of older adults do not have any emergency plans, and they do not keep emergency supplies on hand. But you can't schedule an emergency. So what do you do when 911 can't help? Family caregivers really need to have emergency plans. The Camp Fire of 2018 was the deadliest fire in California's history. It burned more than 150,000 acres and it killed 85 people. The 64 pictures that are on your screen here are the senior casualties. Most of them were found sheltering in their homes. They couldn't escape because of mobility issues or the fact that some of them didn't drive. They called 911, but by then, nobody could reach them in time. Hurricane Harvey in 2017. The residents of this facility also called 911 as the floodwaters started to rise, but it was too late. And this photo here that they posted to Twitter was their last call for help before they lost communications. It took 9 hours before the National Guard was able to begin rescue operations there for the 18 people and their cat who were stranded in waist-deep, contaminated floodwaters. But it's not just widespread disasters that rural family caregivers need to plan for. The everyday type of emergency can quickly turn challenging in a rural area. This is where I live in Wise County, Texas, and it's a typical rural county. There are only a few main roads, and our resources are limited. The population is spread out between a few towns and a lot of country. Now, this is our main north-south route, Highway 287. And about here in August, we had a very serious accident. A driver lost control of his van and rolled it. Many of his 14 passengers were ejected. It took all of our county's ambulances, all 5 of them, plus ambulances and helicopters from neighboring counties to work this accident. And the main north-south highway was closed for many hours. Now, it's not every day that all of your emergency personnel are tied up somewhere, but on this day, that was the case. What would you have done if your caree had had an emergency during this time? Would you have had a plan B ready, or would you have to spend several minutes figuring out, well, what do I do now? Why don't rural caregivers plan for unexpected? It's hard. The plans are available online, but they're very general and they don't consider the needs of rural people or anyone with medical conditions or mobility issues. It leaves caregivers trying to struggle to create their own plans. And with everything else there's doing, it's just too much. So what's the answer? I call this the Senior Shield system. It's a simple 3-step method to create customized emergency plans that are specific for you, your caree, and your location. 3 easy steps. Step 1, assess. Step 2, learn. And step 3, plan. So it's hard to get this whole thing in a short talk, but I want to give you a high-level view. So step 1, you want to assess your situation and do it realistically. Think of your worst day. Don't think of your best day. You want to assess your caree, their abilities, their challenges, health conditions, equipment that they need. Your location, what's unique to your area? Where are some problem areas if you have flooding? Or do you have trains that close the road? Things like that. And also your situation as a caregiver. Are you a solo caregiver? A sandwich caregiver? Are you part of a team, or are you taking care of your caree by yourselves? All these things are important to put into your plan. Just brainstorm everything on one sheet of paper, and then you can move on to step 2. Step 2 is learn. What resources do you need and what's available in your area? I suggest starting to talk with community leaders. Go to City Hall, your county commissioners, whatever the government is in your local area. You can talk to the Office of Emergency Management. There's usually one for the county or in the region. And the fire department, sheriff's department, or police department is also a good place to start. They can point you to people in the community that know about local programs. They can also tell you the worst risks for your area. Not everybody needs to prepare for blizzards, and that can help you as you're preparing all of your plans. Next, make sure and talk to the neighbors. You want to make sure you have their contact information, know what kind of equipment they have. Can they help you in emergency? You never know when you might need your neighbor's 4x4 truck in order to evacuate. Talk to the nearest area agency on aging. They can tell you about regional, state, or volunteer programs in your area. Then you can move on to step 3. Step 3 is plan. And I suggest that you have a plan for each person that you're caring for. I also suggest 3 core plan components. You're going to have a shelter in place. You'll use this during storms, hazmat, pandemics, and you'll need a kit for that plan. This is where you'll have your emergency supplies, your food, your water, extra batteries, things like that. Also, this is where you need to make sure that you have 3 days of food, water, and medicine. That's according to the federal government. But if you're a rural caregiver, I highly suggest you have a week's worth because 3 days just usually isn't enough. You'll also need an evacuation plan. You might need that for hurricanes, fires, tsunamis, and you'll also need a kit for that. You do need to be very mindful of your caree. Let's say they have diabetes. You're going to need to take into consideration keeping the insulin cool, the extra supplies that you need, and if you are planning to go to a public shelter, they need the proper food. Shelters do a great job providing food and water, but they cannot help people with special dietary plans. And the last thing you want is to be dealing with blood sugar issues when you're in a stressful situation like that. You also need a medical binder, and you'll keep that with your shelter in place and your evacuation. But I also suggest you have a kit for it. Besides all of your records, your legal documents like your powers of attorney and DNRs and whatnot, you want to have a hospital bag. This makes it really easy if your caree has things that they need to take with them to make the hospital a little bit more not so stressful for them. Have that stuff packed ahead of time so you're not running around trying to find everything at the last minute. And I want to tell you about two caregivers that I actually knew. Lisa and Beth, they actually live pretty close to me, just a few miles apart from each other. Now, I have changed some of the details because I do live in a small community and I don't want people to know that I'm using them as cautionary tales. But I want to tell you about these two. They both went through Winter Storm Uri, and they both had two very different storm experiences. Now, Lisa was a planner. She takes care of her 81-year-old father who has COPD, diabetes, high blood pressure. So he's on several medications and he needs extra supplies and a walker. He lives alone and access can be an issue depending on the weather. She's a sandwich caregiver who lives in town. She knows all the neighbors, hers and his, how they can use help, how they can help her in a situation, the resources that they have, and they have shared plans so that they know that they may be called upon in bad weather or another emergency. She's also signed her father up for the local programs, like the high priority to get utilities turned back on if we have power outages, and the sheriff's evacuation plan. Her kids, she has kits and emergency equipment ready for everybody. That includes husband, kids, and her father. And when the warnings for Winter Storm Uri came, she simply activated her plan. She knew exactly what to do, and she didn't waste any time trying to figure out, what do I do now? However, Beth is not a planner. She takes care of a 78-year-old mother who is a stroke survivor, so she has mobility and communication issues. She also uses a hospital bed and a wheelchair, and she has multiple medications. Now, she does live with Beth outside of town, but Beth is a solo caregiver. She doesn't have any other family. She knows some of her neighbors, but she doesn't know what they have, and they have no emergency plans together. She's not signed up for any local programs. She didn't have emergency plans, equipment, or supplies ready. And so when it became apparent that Uri was going to hit Texas pretty hard, she started her quest to get groceries, to get water, to get a generator. Well, all those things were already gone. And so Beth and her mother were out of luck in a horrible situation. Which experience do you think was less stressful, less dangerous, and more comfortable for both the caree and their caregiver? I want to leave you with a quote that I really like, because you never know when the day before is the day before. Prepare for tomorrow. Thank you so much to listening to my big idea. And I'll drop a link in the chat. I'm actually getting together a hub, and it's a work in progress at the moment. So if you'd like to sign up early for, it's a free hub with planning and other resources that I think will make caregiving a little less stressful. You can just sign up via that link. Thank you so much.
Okay. Thank you, Amy. All right, Cynthia is our next presenter. We're ready when you are, Cynthia. Cynthia, you are muted.
There we go. What I was saying was thank you to Amy. I thought that was a wonderful big idea, and I think extremely complimentary, as you'll see in a moment, to my perspective and philosophy on caregiving and how to get a hold of it. So welcome, everybody. I appreciate you being here to my big idea called From Boardroom to Living Room, Managing Life's Most Important Project. So I'd like you to imagine for a moment that you're 34 years old and you're working for a large aircraft manufacturer. You are working on the next, latest, greatest industry-changing business aircraft that's going to move mountains. You're a project manager and a program manager, so you've got a lot of balls juggling in the air, and you're managing different teams of engineers, all trying to work together towards one common goal. You've made a lot of sacrifices in your career to be here, you're fulfilled, and you're working with incredible people. And then one day, on a Monday, you get a call from your mom, and she asks you to join her to her doctor's appointment at the end of the week. So of course you say yes, and you think nothing of it. But what you don't know is that in 5 days, you're going to find out that your mother has metastatic bladder cancer and is given less than a year to live. Your life is about to be thrown into chaos. Ladies and gentlemen, this is my story. And in 2015, I sat in the doctor's office with my mom when we got that devastating diagnosis. In the moment, I had no idea what I was going to do. All I knew was that I wanted to be there by her side. In the beginning, my mother's illness hadn't really manifested itself physically. And so she was able to take charge and lead all of the things that she had to do in terms of scheduling her medical appointments, her treatments, her medications, and I just kind of tagged along for the ride. About 3 months into her illness, she was hospitalized for the first of 2 long-term hospital stays. At the end of this first month, it became very apparent that I was going to need to step up and take a much larger family caregiver role when we returned home. Almost overnight, I became her personal assistant, her nurse, her chef, her chauffeur. I became her physical trainer, her financial advisor, her dietitian, her nutritionist. I took on all of these hats and I was thrown deep into chaos. I had an extreme level of anxiety. I had a lot of panic. I wasn't sleeping. It was just so much on my shoulders. And then one day I woke up and I had what I call my aha moment. And in this moment, this epiphany, I had the realization that the things that I was doing, I was managing a project. And when I was able to tell myself that this was a project, it's when everything changed. Now, in traditional project management, the definition is that it's a temporary endeavor undertaken to create a unique product, service, or result. And in this case, the unique product, service, or result for me was the quality of life that I could help my mother have for the end of her days. Traditionally, project managers are managing 3 major constraints in order to deliver their quality project. Scope, which is the things that you have to do. Time, the amount of time it takes to do each one of the tasks, or the amount of time you have to get all of these tasks done. And then cost. What are the resources, tangible and non-tangible, the humans, the equipment, and anything else that you need to accomplish getting these tasks done? How much does that cost? What I want you to see here in this triangle is more of an equation where scope and the quality of scope, the quality of the things that you have to do, are determined by the amount of time you have to do them and the cost with which you have, the cost that they are. And so trying to figure out and be creative in figuring out how to make a great quality outcome is really where a project manager's skills lie. So what did project management, what did these constraints look like for me in my situation in caregiving? Now, I've listed a few items here, and they're not exhaustive, but I'll just give you an idea. So in terms of scope, I had to ask myself, what was my mother's illness? How will it progress? What were the supports that she needed? What medication did she need that allowed me to understand what was really on my plate? And then time, how much time do we have? When will my mother's illness reach different stages? When will she become fully dependent? How often will she have to go to treatments? This was an investment of time that I had to consider. And then lastly, from a cost perspective, it was how much insurance did she have to cover for her medications or other types of treatments? Did she have any money for in-home support? And if not, where else were we going to find those resources? How many days off could I personally afford to take, which ultimately actually made me realize I needed to take a leave of absence from work. But the moment I wrapped my head around that, I knew I had business skills that I could leverage to get me to a higher quality product. And again, that product is higher quality care for my mom. Project managers use things like a communication strategy and risk management. They have to do leadership in the face of uncertainty. They're doing process management, resource management, and stakeholder management, all among the caregiving responsibilities. You know, when I think about communication strategy in a caregiver situation, I think about the fact that the language and the way we speak to medical professionals is very different than the language and the way we speak to Aunt Betty, for example. Or from a risk management perspective, I had to understand what were the symptoms that were baseline symptoms for my mother's illness. And what did I have to look out for to either request an increase in pain medication, to request or to indicate that we were now in crisis and I had to do new things to take a better handle of the situation. When I was able to see this situation as a project, I went into high gear. I put my spreadsheets together. I got my binders together. I knew I had to rally certain people. But one of the things that it actually did for me the most was it allowed me to control the things that were within my control. And I want to be very mindful that in a caregiving situation, especially for an illness, there's so much that is out of our control. But for the things that were, it allowed me to get a handle of that so that I could be there with my mom. And I could not just be her caregiver, but I could also be her daughter. And there's this really interesting thing that happened that allowed me to step into this role. And there are studies that have been done looking at levels of productivity, looking at the relationship the brain has in terms of seeing things as stressors and challenges. And the National Institute for Mental Health did a study looking at levels of productivity and what happens in the brain when it shifts from seeing something as a stressor to something as a challenge. And what happens is we as human beings are able to rise to the occasion. And that's what I'm offering you today, is I'm offering you the opportunity to see that you can handle the things that you are doing so that you can get the most out of your caregiving experience. Now, this was just one experience that I had, but I also had the opportunity to see myself as a caregiver. When my father and a project manager, when my father was diagnosed suddenly in 2022 with a very rare terminal illness called Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease. And in that moment, when I was there with my father and we got that diagnosis, I knew that I now had the language with which to look at the circumstances to be able to make better decisions. I understood that I had to understand what was the scope, what was the time frame, and what was the cost. And in that situation with my dad, we were given 3 to 4 months to live. But I also knew that his disease was going to degenerate quite rapidly. And so I did the immediate leave of absence from work because I had that information understanding. I sought services right away, knowing that he was going to be palliative and understanding what those services were going to be available to me. And I got the family involved a lot sooner. My dad passed 4 weeks later, and I'm so grateful that I was able to see and get a hold of all of the things we had to do so that I could be there and be with my dad. And so this is my big idea. My big idea is not to make you frame your caregiving experience in a very black and white, nuts and bolts, business, cost and dollars and cents way, but to give you the language and the framework to look at your caregiving experience from a project manager's perspective so that it can alleviate some of the stress and the pressure on you, and you can step into this caregiving role, which is one that I truly believe can be transformative, not just for the person that you're caring for, but also for you. I call caregiving my superpower. I am so grateful for this experience. And I really, truly believe that caregiving is the opportunity for us to step into our greatest experience of what it means to be human, to love, to feel, to have emotions, and ultimately to connect. So how am I going to get you to see yourself as a project manager? Well, what I've done is I've put together a project manager's guide to understanding your caregiving scope, managing life's most important project. And in this guide, which is accessible on my webpage, which I'm going to give you the link to now, giving you the language of looking at the different things that you need to see, that you need to take care of to help you get a big picture of what it is that is on your plate. so that you ultimately can have the language to communicate with different stakeholders in your caree's journey and get the most out of it. The other thing I invite you to do is I have the QR code here. I started a podcast called Love, Transform, Evolve. And this is a podcast that is intended to open up the dialogue, open up the conversation around normalizing what it means to be a caregiver. The highs, the lows, the good things, the bad things, but really truly how this experience transforms us as human beings. I speak with experts and other caregivers in all different situations, in different types of caregiving roles, in order to get a collective understanding of what we are all going through. You can also consult my website for coaching and speaking services, and I would love to connect on LinkedIn, or even I'll give you my email address so we can continue to talk about this incredible role and really move the dialogue around caregiving forward. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Cynthia. All right, I'm curious, what did you think about the two ideas presented today? And you know what, I will actually post a little bit of a prompt that you can use when you have a question. You are welcome to raise your hand through one of the reactions on Zoom. You also are welcome to use the chat room. So you know what, sorry, it's the slideshow. So I just want to let you know, okay, so when it's your turn, if you'd like to share something, just let us know. My question is, my concern is, I wonder if. So if you feel comfortable raising your hand and going off mute, you'll want to start with, my question is, my concern is, I wonder if. Okay. So let me stop the slideshow. And let us know what you think.
Hi, I'm Pam. I don't know, can you hear me or did I?
Yeah, hi
Yeah.
Pam.
Hello. I thought this was really helpful. I'm a care manager, private care manager, and I serve as healthcare power of attorney. The majority of my clients don't have family, they're solo agers. So, I have put little emergency plans into place, but it never occurred to me about like natural disasters. I mean, when the power's gone out, I'll give them a call. Most of the time we'll try to arrange to have a caregiver with them so they're not by themselves, depending on their mobility issues. But and it really, I look forward to questioning the local, like our local area agency on aging, like what is out there? What am I missing? So this was a lot more than I expected, so I appreciate it.
Oh, I'm so glad it was helpful. Thank you.
I really believe our local townships, cities really are going to have to step up in a much greater way about emergency preparedness because of our weather systems, which are out of season, much more severe, much more significant. And I think that a small like metropolitan organization would be really smart to invest in someone like Amy as a certified caregiving consultant, for instance, to offer that service to every resident to think through what their family emergency plan. We actually did a pitch to a small town in Massachusetts to offer this. We didn't get it, but I think we're really starting to think through what that looks like. Just want to also mention one other idea, and that is it's not just for family caregivers and older adults, it's also for us in the workplace. Wherever we work, as individuals, we need to think through what's our family emergency plan so that the team continues while we are out managing a caregiving crisis. And it's also a team creates an emergency plan in case someone in the team is out managing a crisis or there's some kind of weather event that disrupts business. And Pam, just to give you an idea, Amy is based in Texas. So she could give you resources in Texas. And so Pam is asking about resources that are in our greater Chicagoland area. And Pam, you could reach out to the area agencies on aging, for instance, the area agency on aging in Lake County, and then Cook County, and then McHenry.
Yeah, I was just wondering if there were any beyond those that, local townships or, I don't know.
Yeah, you could also reach out to, for instance, I mean, I think about Lake County. What are the larger communities in Lake County? You could reach out to Waukegan and say, what do you do to help manage when there's a weather emergency for local residents?
Yeah, the older population specifically, yeah.
Yeah, yep.
Okay, thank you.
I'd love to know if anybody has actually created a family emergency plan for themselves and their family. And if you have, you can say yes in the chat room, just as an unofficial poll. And if you have a question, go ahead and raise your hand or post it in the chat room. That would be great. And what I think is so interesting is that Amy and Cynthia really complemented each other. And Cynthia, you talked about that at the beginning of your presentation. And that is this idea that managing the project is around also managing the crises. And we have to be very open-minded about what a crisis looks like. Sometimes the crisis is help doesn't show up. Sometimes the crisis is a decline in a Carrie's situation. Sometimes the crisis is we are not well. Sometimes the crisis is weather. Sometimes the crisis is a deadline at work, and we need help with caregiving more than usual because we have an important deadline at work. So there's lots of different ways to think about what's the emergency that needs a plan so that caregiving continues, we're okay, everybody else is okay.
And I think it's also important to note too, that a plan is good to have as a baseline. And it's not something that needs to be stuck to as well. But having a plan and deviating from it is better than not having a plan at all, because it allows everybody to start with a certain level of understanding and get everybody on the same page, whoever that everybody ultimately ends up being at different stages of the caregiving journey.
Several years ago, one of my colleagues had been to a meeting to support family caregivers, and it was working family caregivers. And someone in the audience had asked an expert, what's a policy that every organization could implement that supports family caregivers? And the expert didn't know. And so my colleague asked me later, what would you have said to this question? And I would have said, every employee needs to have a family emergency plan and has to review it annually. Every team has to have a family emergency plan and review it annually. That's a policy I think is important for every organization. In truth, sometimes we have an idea when caregiving comes, but you know what, Cynthia, what was your indication that caregiving was going to come for you at 30? What were you, 34?
34, there was no indication whatsoever.
None. And there could have been no way at 34 that you would have thought, oh, I need a family emergency plan. Never in your wildest dreams would you have thought that. However, if you worked for an organization that says, this is our protocol, this is our policy, we all think through what happens if there's an emergency in the family for an individual and for a team. And let's just be prepared, because we never know. We never know.
Yeah. And so often having that plan allows us to make concessions and reach out to other people. In the moment, it's difficult to think of having somebody available to you, right? It's like, oh, this person's busy, that person's busy. So when you're a crisis, that feeds the feeling of loneliness, aloneness, of I got to figure this out by myself. But putting the plan in place allows you to have some time to think about who are those people that I would want to reach out to, get them prepped in case, hey, you're going to be my in case of emergency person. And then that relieves and alleviates the stress in that situation. And again, allows your brain to kind of catch up and say, okay, I've got these bases covered. What else do I need to do for the things that I couldn't plan for?
Yes, and that was awesome. And it also, within the workplace, normalizes our conversation about people we help, people in our life. It could be people in our family, it could be our neighbor, it could be our pets. Our pets need care too. It just normalizes the conversation that all of us take care of someone.
Yeah.
And it's even around as simple as who has a key. Like, who is the person that has a key to my apartment?
Yes.
My sister-in-law died unexpectedly in July. And I'm trying to understand from my sister-in-law's sister, who's really just having a difficult time, if they've been able to get into her condo yet. But I don't think they've been able to get into my sister-in-law's condo yet. No one had a key. My sister-in-law didn't want anybody to have a key, and she didn't want anybody allowed.
Right.
And that allowed her privacy around her hoarding. So that was really what she was trying to hide. The challenge, though, is now that she is gone, they can't get into her condo. So just thinking about, in case of emergency, who has access to my apartment, my condo, my house? It's really important to think about that. Who has the keys? And so if we think about keys in a more general idea too, like who has the keys to my important documents? Who has the keys to what my care needs in case I'm not well? Who has the keys to how this could run? Yeah, exactly. Pam is sharing in the chat room about what you can do for access to a house. You can put a lockbox with a key outside. You can also give a key to the fire department. And I think the other thing is we never want a situation where there's an emergency in the house. The fire department can't get in without breaking down the door. And then there's a house without a door. So we want to make sure that there's safe and easy access into a house in case of an emergency. Yeah, what are we missing, Amy, when we think about this conversation about family emergency planning?
Well, it's been an issue for a while. The Red Cross, they just did their going beyond, I forget the name of the study that they just did in 2022. And they identified the fact that people know that they need to be doing these plans, but they're putting it off because there's no easy way to do it. And so they're even trying to figure out ways. They're working with the Rosalind Carter Institute for Caregivers. Might have gotten some of those words mixed up, but they're trying to come up with easier plans for people to follow. What I noticed around here is when you're stressed, when you're in emergency and you're trying to think on the fly, okay, who can I call? This person is busy. I can't get out. The waters are rising or whatever the crisis happens to be. You're not going to make good decisions when your mind is going in 500 different directions. Whereas even if it doesn't have to be a perfect plan, Cynthia is totally right. Just something to get you started thinking about what all your options are. Because if you wait, you're not going to have any options to choose from. So I understand we are all really busy. I need to update my plan, to be perfectly honest. Do as I say, not as I do. We're busy, and it's just easier to put it off until tomorrow, and then tomorrow, and then tomorrow, and then something happens. Not really sure that I answered your question, but I went off on my own little thing.
Yeah. And I think what's really helpful too is you both have really highlighted the fact that starting the planning process is also about starting a conversation. And it's helpful to start the conversation. And just that conversation can start to lead to solutions that you just thought, well, I just don't know what to do about this. And as you talk it out, a solution might present itself. As you make phone calls, as you start to do research, a solution may present itself. That's what's helpful about it.
And I think to that point, oftentimes the conversation is not started because people think that once the conversation is started, they have to come up with the solution at the same time. Where a conversation can start with a question and it can go on. And that's the awesome thing about being a project manager in a planning situation, is that you can allow that conversation to go and grow, right? And to evolve. And it doesn't all need to happen at once. You know, there's a proverb that says that an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. And that's really what this planning is all about, is this taking little, small, tiny, bite-sized areas of the whole entire caregiving scope and putting things in place so that if and when it's not as impactful and stressful on the situation.
And I want to mention that sometimes if you have a conversation like this in the family, there are some family members who get too stressed out by the conversation that they will want to shut the conversation down. And it's okay. You just have realized, oh, they aren't ready for the conversation. So you look to who else could you have the conversation with? I think one of the hardest roles we play in a caregiving situation is that we are the reality check. And at times, no one wants to hear the reality check. And yet, it's okay if someone is processing at a slower space and a slower pace than we are to the reality. It still means we stay in the front of reality and look to what other support is out there to manage reality. It's important.
Never
Yeah.
underestimate the power of planting a seed.
Right. Yes. Yes. Exactly. Exactly. So I think about my mom, who had a very difficult time talking about end of life wishes, specifically around cremation. My parents decided cremation. My dad was like, okay, so give me the contract to sign, I'll sign it. For my mom, when we went through the process with someone from the Cremation Society coming to their apartment, she signed the paperwork and said, I have a stomach ache. I have to lay down. It was too much for her. But after she died, what I found in her wallet was the little card from the Cremation Society that they gave her. So she had a hard time with it, and she also was able to figure out how to manage it in her own way. And it was very comforting for me to find that card in her wallet after she died, because I thought, oh, I'm pushing her too hard. But it ultimately was what helped her as well. So I guess if we were to think about what's our first step that we can take, Amy and Cynthia, I'd love for you to each kind of break it down into, we've got 5 minutes over the next week to start doing something around planning and project management. What's the first step we can take? And Amy, I'll start with you.
I definitely think that it's having a conversation. If you can try to plan with your caree and the rest of your family, that's wonderful. My own family, they're very much, let's stick our head in the sand. And so I would try to get their input. But then I just started writing everything down, and I've got a notebook that's just notes on different emergency stuff and different people that could help. If, you know, I'm not married or anything, and so I know nothing when the generator doesn't start, you know, who's down the street that might be able to help me get it going. It's just stuff like that. I would say just start getting your thoughts together and start the conversation. Cynthia was completely right. You do not have to, sit down at the kitchen table with your pad and say, we are going to have a plan at the end of 10 minutes, because that's just not going to happen. This is an ongoing process, and you have to keep it updated. For one thing, your caree is going to be changing. like Denise said, the weather's changing, these storms are getting worse. A plan is never finished. It's always evolving.
I just want to mention something that I love about your suggestion, Amy, is that if others aren't ready to participate in the conversation, have the conversation with yourself with pen and paper, right? Well, how great is that to just let it all out through pen and paper and then think, okay, who is it that could continue this conversation with me? I've just started the conversation with myself. Who's next? Okay, Cynthia, what would you suggest for?
I'm just going to echo all of that and say that any step towards putting a plan together, the first step is understanding what you're dealing with. It's awareness. And sometimes it's really hard to see the forest through the trees because you're in it. And so I'm going to shamelessly plug here, but what I will say is that the guide that I put together allows you to have a jumping off start point to just ask yourself those questions, where emergency plan is one of all of the things that you might be responsible for. I have found, and we as humans, we think in pictures more than we think in words. So I have found it very beneficial to do this, what Amy calls this brainstorming session, or to get the pad and paper and do a brainstorming session and literally have a blank piece of paper and just draw these kind of big circles with the overarching themes and put answers and put those into the big circles where the picture will soon start to form. And it might feel overwhelming, but what it might also do is handing this over to the piece of paper means it relieves it from your own brain. And it allows you to see these different circles as puzzle pieces that you can then, something will jump out at you and say, oh, I know I can take a step in this area. And the low hanging fruit, this is, what we use in business language, you want to go after that low hanging fruit. Well, you want to go after the things that make you feel comfortable. Why? Because the things that you can actually do will help you build confidence in the areas that you're less secure with. And the more you can cross something off in this big picture, the more you can feel like you have things under control and therefore go tackle those things that are a little less familiar to you.
Okay, that sounds great. And Laura had asked a question about meeting with Amy for family emergency planning. And I just want to let you know that Amy is part of our certified caregiving consultant training program. And as part of that program, our consultants, so is Cynthia too. So Cynthia has created a workbook. We also have a workbook for family emergency planning, and we actually have a free monthly session that you can join. And consultants offer this as well through our community, Caring Our Way. You are welcome to join us any month. It's always on the fourth Friday of every month where we do free family emergency planning. We help you get started. And that would be a great place to connect with Amy and Cynthia as well when they can join us. So we're here to offer you our resources and our support. We know that it can feel overwhelming. And what's so great is that we have been overwhelmed too. We understand it, which is why we really thought through what are the simple solutions we can offer to help you so that you can chip away at the overwhelm and then have a plan in place on the other side. And maybe one other first step is just thinking, who has a key to my house? And it's not the little ceramic frog that you keep on the on the porch, right? I mean, maybe it is the ceramic frog, but it could be also helpful to have someone else actually have the key. Who has a key to my house? And then who knows who has a key to my house? So for instance, if I have a neighbor who has a key, I would tell my siblings, this is who you can go to get the extra key to get in. Yep, and we need to think about pets too, and pets are very important about process around family emergency planning. We know one of the reasons that people hesitate to evacuate is because they worry about the pet. How will the pet manage? Where's the shelter I can go to where I can bring my pets? Yeah, absolutely. Pets are part of family emergency planning. Yeah. Thank you guys all so much for being here and for your contribution in the chat room and for your questions. And please keep us posted on your planning process. We'd love to know what your next step is and how that next step maybe offers some comfort for you. I think every worry needs a plan. What you're worrying about needs a plan. Okay, Amy and Cynthia, thank you guys so much. This was great. And if you haven't had a chance, go ahead and put your contact information in the chat room. If you are watching the archive, their contact information will be part of our show notes. And I know you're here for CEUs because you're here live, so I'm going to stop the recording and help you get your CEU. And I'm going to thank those who have watched the recording. Thank you so much. We hope you found this helpful.